Hello, welcome to another video from the conscientious biologist Ben Gallagher. This one's the sixth one in the Ecology series and looks at the carbon cycle. It's suitable for GCSE level, and please, as always, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do so. So the carbon cycle is probably the most important matter recycling cycle that we need to look at. And the reason for that is because carbon is such a fundamentally important chemical to use when it comes to making biological systems. Most of our key molecules are based on carbon. Amino acids, glucose, lipids, fatty acids, all of those things are all based on carbon atoms, and that's because carbon's a very, very versatile atom. It can make multiple bonds, meaning you can make a lot of different molecules from it. But as you will have seen from the matter recycling video, there's a limited amount of atoms on planet Earth. It's not like there's loads of deliveries coming to us from outer space. So that carbon that's so essential to living things has to just keep being reused from one organism to the next over time. So let's look at a good start point for that. The key start point here is the carbon that's in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So if you look up there, I've drawn you a little carbon dioxide molecule. That's kind of what it looks like. So we're going to use that as the basis for this. Now, a lot of carbon cycles that you see in textbooks are very much just cycles, just diagrams that don't make a lot of sense. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make it something a bit more visual so you can relate to it. So let's start with a key thing that can take that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. I've got a tree there. It doesn't have to be a tree, it could be any green plant. And the reason why I've picked that is because green plants do photosynthesis. And through photosynthesis, they're pulling that atmospheric carbon dioxide in, reacting it with water, using chlorophyll as a catalyst to trap energy from sunlight in a molecule of glucose. And if you look at the formula for the molecule of glucose, which you should remember from the photosynthesis lessons, it's C6H12O6. That means the carbon from the carbon dioxide has now gone into the glucose molecule. 6 carbons, so 6 carbon dioxides went into a glucose molecule. Now, of course, plants are living things, so they need to get their energy back out of the glucose, so they do respiration. So we can add that, and already we've got a small cycle. We've got photosynthesis bringing it in, respiration taking it back out, and it can go back and forth. If plants were the only thing on the planet, that would be the end of the carbon cycle pretty much. Okay, but we know it's not that simple. But plants, if you remember, and I've put it on the bottom there, are the producer when we're looking at food chains. That's their trophic level because they're producing the glucose. So that glucose can be eaten by primary consumers. I know rabbits don't eat trees, before anyone says anything, but I've just picked a rabbit as a random primary consumer that fits in with our food chain. So a lot of that carbon that was in the producer, whatever plant that may be, will then end up in the primary consumer. Now, primary consumer is always going to be an animal, so they will also be doing respiration, breaking down that glucose, releasing that carbon dioxide back out into the atmosphere. So now you could go on a cycle into the plant and back out of the plant, photosynthesis, respiration, or you could go into the plant, into the animal, back into the atmosphere. So you've got a longer loop on your cycle. Of course, primary consumers can be eaten by secondary consumers. Secondary consumers will also do respiration. So now your cycle could be atmosphere to plant to primary consumer to secondary consumer to back to the atmosphere. So you've got different routes, different cycles you could take. Now, that's a good kind of start point. You've got those cycles there, and that's lovely, and that's what's happening just day in, day out. However, what you have to factor into this is that at some point, all plants and all animals die, but the carbon is still in their bodies. Now, if you think back to the previous presentation on matter recycling, or 2 presentations ago, what will happen to that dead material now is decay. You'll get decomposers, bacteria, fungi, worms, and other smaller detritivores will just eat that dead material. Now remember, decay isn't anything unusual. It's not a process all in its own right. Decay is just the word we give to the feeding of those decomposing organisms, of the bacteria, the worms, and the fungi. So they're just eating the dead plants, the dead rabbits, the dead foxes, the dead materials. And because they're eating it, they're getting the carbon, which means, of course, they in their own way are then respiring. And that respiration just returns the carbon dioxide. So we've got the ordinary loops kind of in the middle, but then when things die, that carbon is still recycled back by decay by those microorganisms. They're still living things, they're still doing respiration. There's one little link that we've got missing from here though, and it links up to that thing at the bottom, to when you've got the dead materials, because sometimes organisms don't decay, they don't rot down, they don't get decomposed, so their carbon doesn't get re-put into the atmosphere. What can happen instead is, over millions and millions of years, if there's no decay, there's just kind of pressure and heat and squashing, and over millions of years underground, the dead materials can turn into fossil fuels: coal, oil and gas. So when you're burning coal, oil or gas, what you're actually burning is ancient remains of creatures that lived millions of years ago. You're literally setting fire to what once could have been a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Okay, that's what you've got. It's that energy from the carbon molecules locked up in the coal, oil or gas. Now, of course, to get that carbon back out, it's not respiration. To get the carbon back out of fossil fuels, you have to burn them. And the correct word for that is combustion. When you burn fossil fuels, the glucose, anything other, all the other carbon molecules that are left in those fossil fuels will react with the oxygen in the air and reform carbon dioxide. And that completes the carbon cycle by putting that loop over the other side. So take a screenshot of this, and then we're going to do a little simplification. Okay, let's move on to the simplification. So that last diagram, lots of arrows, lots of loops, hopefully very obvious because I made it very visual. You can literally see the creatures and it's set out around a food chain. But let's just simplify that a bit more. If we take the atmospheric carbon dioxide, by photosynthesis, the carbon's going to be turned into glucose. So the carbon in the atmospheric carbon dioxide is locked up in molecules of glucose through photosynthesis. To return it back, you've basically got respiration. Okay, initially it's the plant that uses some of that glucose in respiration, releasing some of the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So I've got by plants over there. But of course, we said as you move up the food chains, the higher trophic levels, the animals, will also respire the glucose, releasing the carbon dioxide. And of course, we said when living things die, the glucose and other carbon-containing molecules are respired by decomposers, which releases the carbon dioxide in its own right. So the respiration arrow there has got by plants, by animals, and by decomposers. And decomposers can include fungi, bacteria, and prototists. Okay, so that's really a simplification. The only thing that we would need to add to that was that last little section, which was on the combustion of fossil fuels. Still put it in red, still with the other ones, it's still that bottom arrow because it's still returning the carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. But at its most simple, this is it. So take a screenshot of this one now. That very simplified cycle there is the basic, most simplified version of the carbon cycle I could get. The previous slide is a much better one to use, but this will do. Okay, take a screenshot of this one. And that's it for carbon cycle, quite straightforward. Lots of little processes, and hopefully you'll see that you can use the carbon cycle to revise huge amounts of biology, because you've got photosynthesis and respiration, which you need to know in massive detail. You could go and revise respiration in terms of how do they get what they need for that. So you could go and look all at the digestive system, how they get their glucose. You could look at the respiratory system, how they get the oxygen. You could look at the circulatory system for how those things get transported around multicellular organisms and animals. You can look at photosynthesis, you can look at plant physiology, you can look at the leaf cross-section, you can look at osmosis for how they're taking the water in to react the water with the atmospheric carbon dioxide. There's so much revision that you can put into those two processes. Then you can revise all your food chains, your movement through the trophic levels, the changes in energy. You can revise decay. You could link in a bit of chemistry with the combustion stuff. Carbon cycles are really, really nice topic to use to revise huge amounts of biology. Next cycle I want you to look at though is the water cycle. That's really straightforward. It's a really simple little cycle presentation. As always, as I said at the start, please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Like this video is useful, and I've now also got a Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook, go to Facebook, search for The Conscientious Biologist. There's lots more on there than just the videos. Thank you.